he did show up 3 weeks later. And we heard him on the phone talking to his boss or someone else. I don't know. But he's like, these guys are crazy. You know? Like, they're doing things with machines that I've not seen mills that have been around for 40 years doing.
Welcome back to In the Works, where we celebrate ingenuity, resilience, and craftsmanship through interviews with people behind Gripstick, entrepreneurs, and other American-based businesses. Subscribe to us on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. In today's episode, we're discussing socks, and I'm joined by Kevin, who is the design lead for our sock development team.
Greetings.
Greetings, humans. What people don't know is that Kevin's actually an alien.
That's true. I've just come down here to give you the gift of socks.
Now, the first question I have is like, what alien terminology is rambulette?
There was
Rambunctious?
Rambula. It's a French word. We actually had a pretty serious debate as to whether or not that should be on the packaging, mostly because people can't spell it. And fun fact, people use the term merino all the time for wool that's been sourced here in the U.S.
Right.
But actually, it's like the lion's share of it's Rambula. So Rambula is a breed of sheep. If you and I were first cousins, you would be a Rambula and I'd be merino, or vice versa. So they're really, really close. There's a long-standing history of Rambula sheep. They actually were given back and forth to countries as like bartering for support during wars back in the old days. Yeah,
okay.
So kind of fun fact there. But they came to Utah specifically quite a long time ago. So Utah has a long, rich history with Rambula sheep down south in southern Utah. And the vast majority of our fine wool breeds here in Utah are Rambula. So Rambula differences in terms of merino have really long hair, staple length is what we call it. It's usually 3+ inches long. Rambula is a little bit shorter. It can still be 3 inches, but Rambula has a finer crimp, which means it's kind of zigzaggy.
Okay.
If you pulled the fiber out, it kind of has like an elasticity to it. Okay. Which can be a benefit. It improves loft. It improves, obviously, natural elasticity. But also the animal is much bigger. The French crossbred the Rambula with a mountain sheep, so it's able to withstand, the rugged climate of Utah. You don't have to have it, in some green pasture somewhere in New Zealand. It'll tolerate it. So they're also really good for other than just being a wool sheep. The meat is also good. So ranchers around here love them.
That's awesome.
Yep.
Now, look, I'm new to the company, and so I've seen some of the stuff that we've worked on in the past, and I've always been like, as I was getting into the deep dive of some of the content that we've done in the past, when we had an ad that showcased a little bit of the sheeps, and I just was like, this is awesome. So
it's just sheep.
It's just those are just sheep. They're not even the real thing.
Yeah, well, I don't think the plural for sheep is sheeps.
Yeah, you're right. Is it just sheep?
Listen, I actually don't know. It's not maybe it's a flock. It's not a murder of sheep.
Listen, if you are a sheep expert or a marine or a Rambula expert, please leave the comments below on how to properly describe a flocking of sheep.
Yeah.
In any case, talk to me. What is the process from sheep to us?
Yeah, that's a good question, actually. And for everyone that knows Gripsticks well enough, we always try to find products that can be made here.
Right.
Ironically, growing up in Utah, you see sheep all the time. They're crossing the road in some rural area, whatever, they're moving around. But most people disconnect that animal to a finished fiber that we might actually wear, right? So the general process is we have raised, whether it's merino, Rambula, and a half a dozen, if not more, there's probably more like 2 dozen other breeds of sheep that we have bred them specifically to grow wool. Mm-hmm. So they have to be shorn is the proper term. They have to be shorn once a year, at least, sometimes a little bit more than that, depending. If not, there's actually you can Google it. I think, if I'm not mistaken, Google like Shrek the sheep. It's really fun, actually.
Okay.
There was like a merino sheep that escaped his flock down in New Zealand somewhere, or maybe Australia, I don't remember. And it was like gone for maybe 2 or 3 or 4 years. Eventually the sheep will die. But they caught this guy, and I think there might be more than one. But anyway, it's just like a walking cotton ball, but the weight is substantial, so after a while it'll just kill the animal. So anyway, that's not a good thing. But long story short, we've bred these animals to grow hair.
Yeah.
If we don't shear them, it's unhealthy.
Yeah.
Okay, so we shear it. Now, the other fun fact there is for every pound of wool from a sheep, because there's other breeds that this is not quite the same, about half of that weight is actually usable fiber. The other half is it's desirable, but not, it's gross.
Okay.
Like grease, which for all you makeup wearers out there, lanolin is a huge industry. And actually, most of the people that process wool, lanolin's quite valuable. In some cases, it's more valuable than the wool.
Okay, so I'm going to pause here for a second.
Yeah.
What is lanolin?
It's just like an oil.
That comes from the wool?
Yeah, it comes from the wool.
Oh, okay.
I think it probably helps with the to protect the sheep, not only like waterproofness, but I think it does something either from an antimicrobial perspective or maybe antibacterial. So like flies have a tendency to find their way into wool hair or into sheep wool, and so I think it helps with that a little bit too. But anyway, they wash that out. Then you've got in Utah, we've got sage and dirt and dust.
Right.
It's Wyoming sheep are filled with grit. Like it's pounds when you really think about it. So after all that's said and done, you have kind of like this effluent that comes off the washing plant, and it's like pretty organic stuff, dirt, poop, for lack of a better word, and just hair, like not hair, but like grass and things like that. But then also the lanolin, which gets, they put it through a centrifuge, and lanolin gets harvested, right? And then the rest of it goes off to be the next stage into being wool. It goes in our socks, and not every product is like this, and I'm going to nerd out here if that's okay.
I was about to look, everyone. Two things are going to happen right now. We're going to nerd out. I'm gonna enjoy this nerding out, while hopefully you do too. But at the end of this podcast, there will be a test on all the crazy new terminology that you can use on your daily basis. So stay tuned, Kevin. I'm strapped in, bro. Okay. Let's go.
I mean, the last, some of you may have seen the commercial that I did, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. I get accused a lot of being, a full-blown wool nerd, and I am. It's a miraculous fiber.
Now, did you become a wool nerd in the process of designing the sock, or did you already have a passion for the animal and for the product that comes from it?
I'd probably be lying if I said I had a passion for the animal on any level. I didn't know it, right? But I've been a wool user. The oldest piece of clothing that I own is a wool sweater that I bought when I was 19.
Right.
And I was a backpacking instructor for 8 years. I wore a lot of wool socks before they were good. But they were good, meaning like the elastic in those old socks were terrible. Yeah. But the material properties of wool back then were still really good. They were just kind of itchy. We didn't really understand. Well, we probably did. We just
didn't have the machine. Yeah.
We weren't manufacturing wool to the standards that we do today. The elastics come, but that wool sweater, this is gross. I don't think I've ever washed it. Like not once.
Does it smell?
No.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right? It's why
I'm just lazy, and I think it's fantastic, but like I got out my snowblower the other day and did some snow blowing. I had it on. It's a nice sweater too, but after 20 years it's just a sweater. I think I got it from LL Bean. Anyway, snowblowers are gas greasy, they stink. You smell like a snowmobiler after using them. That's right. And I walked in, I took off, I had my wool sweater, but I also had a nylon jacket over it, and my jacket still stinks. I put it on this morning, I'm like, good grief. But I got into my closet the other day, and I'm like, oh man, I'm finally going to have to wash this thing. It doesn't stink at all. So it's little stuff like that. I'm sure it's got bacteria in it, but I don't know. I mean, make your judgments, I'm pretty gross. Anyway, So yeah, I had a huge passion for wool products, and still do. I have a lot of wool in my closet.
That's cool.
The properties are just really, really good. So as far as nerding out on the next step, after the wool has been, it's called a scouring plant. So scouring is what separates all the grease, poop, whatever. Now that being said, it doesn't scour everything, because like hair, burrs, things like that can be really stuck in there. Right. So it'll take care of like the grit and the dirt and the grease, but it can't get rid of other things. So it goes on to the next step, which is a super washing if your garment is eventually going to be able to be washed in a regular residential washing machine. Yeah. And this is the nerd part. So if you looked at a wool fiber under a microscope, it kind of looks like a rose bush.
like prongs
Yeah,
or
so
whatever.
these little hooks everywhere,
Okay.
you know, and everyone knows. Well, not everyone, but if you've ever given it a moment's thought, you'd probably come to that realization. But if you take wool and just kind of rub it together, eventually it sticks together. Not unlike like dreadlocks, right? Maybe human hair has the same things. I don't know. I have not really. We have no intention of making socks out of human hair, so. Anyway, that's called felted wool. So hats and a lot of wools, you know, like beaver,
Right.
a lot of them will felt. So felted wool, we're trying to avoid that. Like old school wool garments, there's a lot of negative.
Connections. Like a lot of users and a lot of individuals, like I actually had an experience as a younger kid where my mom did get me a wool sweater.
Yeah.
And I absolutely despised it because it was so itchy.
Yeah. Yeah. So first of all, well, we'll take a side tangent real quick because there's a lot of meat on this bone. So number one, you can again do your own homework. Wool allergies, and we're going to get comments for days on this one. Wool allergies is not a thing. There are thousands of pages of studies that have been done by colleges, and wool is essentially hypoallergenic.
We'll leave some links to some
I'll
down below.
happily, if you want to pour through the data. Yeah. I've only done that recently because people have asked me, and I'm like, I don't know, and I'm a curious person, so no pun intended. I pull on that sweater thread, and I'm like, wow, it really isn't allergics. But what they do associate with allergies is just like you said, they get poked, and so that's a function of just like the wrong wool for the wrong garment.
Yeah.
You can have like next to skin, like a sweater, for example, like my wool sweater from LL Bean. I don't know what the micron count is, but I can guarantee you it's not as fine as what we use today. It's probably like a 24, 23. For a cutoff on feet, we don't go any higher. Higher. Yeah, we don't go any higher than 23.5. Your feet are callous; they can handle a little bit rougher.
Yeah.
But if you wear it like on your chest where it's really sensitive, you want much finer microns. So anyway, my sweater, it could be, I don't know, 28, 29, and they're designed to wear over a long sleeve shirt or some other type of shirt. They're not really made to be worn against the skin.
Yeah.
So that's number one, is just kind of knowing how to best use wool, right? But nevertheless, the other negative connotation with wool, besides just like the itchiness, I'm allergic to it. You know, I'm not going to get any arguments with people. They can do their own homework. But the other one is shrinkage.
Yeah.
Not the Seinfeld shrinkage.
I was in the pool.
Shrinkage, everyone thinks like, okay, pull out one wool like hair, just like out of my head or beard or whatever, and you put it in the washing machine, and people think, hot, whatever, it's shrinking, and you put in this XL sweater and it comes out like a doll sweater.
Yeah.
That actually is not a function of shrinking the fiber itself. It's a function of felting. That's not superwash wool. Superwash wool it goes through a process which is a pretty, and I'm kind of sensitive to these things. It goes through a very mild chemical bath, and there's like a half a dozen different ways you can do it. There's some that are very green and some are very friendly, Then there's others that, like, the most aggressive chemical is basically chlorine, which most of us use in our household every day. But it's just enough to burn off those little horns that get connected to everything. And then the last step is they put a coating on it, which is so thin, it allows the wool to still do its thing. All it really does is add a little bit of slipperiness to it. And actually the same coating, it's called Hercosset 125. Hercosset 125 is on every sheet of printer paper we've ever used in our household for, 40 years. And basically, when you think about it, when a sheet of paper gets pulled off the rollers, that Hercosset allows enough friction, or reduces friction enough to allow that to happen. You think about, are you a Mythbusters fan?
I am a Mythbusters fan.
Did you ever watch that episode where they took the two phone books and leaved them together?
I don't think I did.
Okay, well, eventually they're trying to separate them.
That's right. I do remember
ended up with like two tanks or something to separate them, like friction.
And they had like locked in.
100% guarantee phone book paper does not have Hercosset 125 on it. And even if it did, I'm not sure that it would have worked. But, that's like a raw paper that's untreated. If you spilled like a little drop of water, it would immediately absorb into it because it's hydrophilic. It likes water. Mm-hmm. So all Hercosset 125 is not a waterproofing agent or anything like that. All it does is fill in a nano amount of the roughness of the fiber and make it a little bit. And when I say nano, I'm not exaggerating. It's nano.
Yeah.
It just makes it a little bit smoother so the fibers can pass by each other a little bit easier, and that helps with the agitation during a normal wash cycle.
Right.
From there, it gets carded, which is the process. It's like think like brushing a dog's hair that's run through the brush, you know. It aligns the fibers in a straight row, gets them ready for, it gets turned into roving or wool top. And then it gets sent off to a spinner from that point where you kind of order what size fiber you need for the spinning application that you're going to use.
So at that point, so you're, I just want to make sure I can understand. You're saying after they've done this process, they now have it in a malleable setup to be able to turn it into the fibers that we need for clothing.
Yeah, wool top, which is kind of like, to put it in layman's terms, wool top would be the equivalent of buying ground beef.
Yeah, okay.
It's something anybody can turn in. Well, I shouldn't say anybody.
Yeah.
But anyone in the knitting industry can take wool top, turn it into something from that point. So wool top is what gets traded all over the country,
right,
or world, really.
Right. And that's at that point, that's when whatever, Gripsticks takes it and we say, we need what?
So we call a spinner here in the country, States or whatever, and they'll buy wool top from the company that makes it, and we'll specify we need that wool top separated and spun, and we give them like specifics, like we want this many twists per inch, which has a big deal on the strength, but it's kind of like there's actually a double-edged sword with twist. The more twist you give it, the stronger it is, but it also is less soft. The less twist, it's way soft, but it's not strong. So there's like a fine line for you to build. Very delicate balance between.
How big of a process was that for you guys to figure out?
So that's a good question.
I guess let me ask this question. Do we want to go there now, or do you want to come back to it?
I'll give you the quick answer. Fortunately, we're not walking on the moon. This isn't like, we're not the first people
to have done this, right?
No, there's a lot of people in the industry that are willing to share that information, especially the people along the way, that actually produce the fibers. When you start talking about competitors, like other sock knitters, they might be a little bit more guarded about what they're doing. And there are certain like blends, for example, like, and we can get into that in a second, but like if you take the wool fiber, that wool top, and then you blend it a little bit with nylon or poly or acrylic, you can blend it with all sorts of things, and
that is what we do.
We do. There's two reasons you might do that, and we can go down that path real fast.
Okay. Let's do loop back to that one.
Rein me back in.
Yeah, I'm gonna take this notepad real fast, and I'll roll good. So why don't you? So we've now specified how we want the thread to be spun.
Yep.
And then it goes into coloring, or does it go to us?
It actually goes to the dye house.
The dye house.
Yep.
Okay.
The dye house is the last step before it gets to us.
Cool. Wonderful stuff, man. This is great. I truly love I'm also a curious person, and I really enjoy learning about some of this stuff, because part for me, and I think for some of the listeners is that, this is the story that comes from thing. And you said it at the very beginning. You mentioned that, like, for a lot of people, they go to the rural family, their wives, you're going to the in-laws house and the sheep crosses the road because you're in rural America, and you're like, oh, that sheep, why can't they just hurry it along? But what we don't recognize is how much of that's being used for different things. Like, those farmers are using the thing for products that we use on a daily basis.
Yeah.
Which is great. Yeah. And I think, it's great for us to connection. That's why it's important for us to share these stories, for people to recognize, man, like, a lot of people that live here in America touched this product, which is awesome to think about. Yeah. So, okay. Yeah, you know what? Let's dive into then a little bit, because being here, learning a lot about socks, learning a lot about the products we have here. One of the things I think that we have a lot on your specific video that people like they love watching your video, but they also love hating on the video.
Yeah,
which is a double. Which is haters make us famous. Okay,
I don't care.
But one of the things is talking about it not being 100% wool.
Yeah.
Why shouldn't it be?
That's a great question.
100% wool.
It's one of the things that every sock manufacturer probably just rolls their eyes a little bit when people say that. And it's not that it's not maybe they've said that, because they'll say I don't think I've ever heard anyone say it's not 100% wool, but maybe. But they'll get real passionate about the percentage of wool.
Yeah,
right?
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah, and okay, so first of all,
the wool we use is 100% wool.
Well,
Not everything is 100%.
everyone could say that. Like the wool we use is 100% wool. What else would it be? Like so I'll tell you, like our recipes, everyone does it a little bit different.
Yeah.
And the last thing I want to do is talk about any other manufacturer. First of all, any manufacturer that's making socks in the U.S., my hat goes off to them. Darn Tough makes a great sock. Smart Wool still makes a great sock. There's probably a half a dozen manufacturers, like good quality sock mills in the country, and they all are doing a good job. And the fact that sock knitting is still a viable industry in this country, that's a great thing.
It is a great thing.
Do your homework someday in your own time, you, whoever else is watching this, about the beating that the American textile industry has taken over the last 30 years, 40 years.
We'll probably do an episode on that eventually.
I mean, it hurts. And so the fact that they're still fighting the good fight, that's my hat goes off. And truthfully, we work with a lot, we've had conversations with them. They're very friendly. They're not cagey about what they're doing. It's a close-knit, no pun intended, close-knit group. So anyway, recipes.
Yes.
The example that I give people all the time is, okay, if you ever watch Chopped?
Yeah, they have like the basket.
Yeah, everybody gets the same ingredients, but yet the end is very different.
Right.
That's no different from us to anyone else. People always ask, why are your socks different? Man, there could be 10 different, maybe more answers, right? But so first things first, we choose a blend, and that's intentional. When you blend wool top and you're spinning your fiber, you can add other fabric, other materials. By nature, sheep, remember I mentioned staple length. That's the length of each individual hair. Right? Mm-hmm. So we like to see staple length, in the 2.5 to 3.5 range, give or take. That makes a stronger fiber. It's longer. But that's pretty good, When you think about nylon is its length is indefinite. It could be, one strand could be 20 miles long. So it's really strong, right? Other materials we're not a big fan of. Polyester has some downside to it. Acrylic is one of the largest, it's like one of the biggest sources of microplastics. It's also pretty cheap. I don't know that I'm a huge fan of acrylic, so we wouldn't blend with acrylic, but people do, and they have their reasoning for doing it. But our reasoning for doing it is strength. Adding a little bit of nylon, and it's a small percentage. I think we're 90-10. We use 90% wool, 10% nylon. That's really high. That's at the fiber, right? The actual yarn that's going into the sock. Right. From that point on, we're diluting it, and for good reason. We don't ever dilute things for cheapness. Yeah. We do it intentional, right? So our socks and all the major socks that you would probably buy from a wool manufacturer in the last 20 years use a type of construction called sandwich knit. Basically, think of it like, if you know anything about construction, you have rebar as the core, and then they pour concrete around it. You never see the rebar, but it's there, and it adds strength. There's a relationship between the two things, right? Sock knitting is the same thing. We have kind of an internal layer that's made out of, it's primarily nylon, but it's got an elasticity component, spandex or lycra or something. And it's air tacked together, and it gives the sock its initial elastic ability.
Initial? I mean,
look,
I've been wearing the socks, and I'm going to tell you, I have truly been blown away at the fact that, they just hold.
Oh, yeah.
And I think our socks just hold. Yeah. And we've had conversations in the past, and we'll get to it in a second, but and I think that's something that a lot of our customers have encountered. That they're just great socks, and I think part of the greatness does come from this portion that you guys have worked on. Yeah,
elasticity. People don't realize the science. If there was, and this is probably a bold statement, but as someone who worked as a backpacking guide for a long time, and you get pretty passionate about the socks that you like and don't like, you start to realize, let's back to the chopped. If someone really likes garlic, they're going to put a lot of garlic in there, but if someone else doesn't, then you're like, man, that's a lot of garlic.
Yeah.
So it's all personal preference. And, Darn Tough has what they do because, it's in the name. Their socks are incredibly durable.
Yeah.
There's some sacrifices there, and I'm not going to talk about them because but bottom line is, it's not, you can't go really hard in one direction without sacrificing in another.
Right.
And so when we sat down to make our socks, we chose a slightly different route because we feel like hugging the foot is tantamount to being a great quality sock.
What was that decision like? how like where did you guys end up with that decision? And I guess what I'm ultimately asking is like, why did you go over function? That's really where you're going down to, right?
Yeah, if they don't function first, it's a sock. There's so many sock companies out there that are fashion. We don't need another one. There's 2,000 sock fashion first companies. We set out like number one. If you're using wool, you've already made the decision that you're function first.
Yeah,
because wool is a phenomenal fiber in terms of wicking and moisture management, and it's warm, it's dry, it's antimicrobial, it checks all the boxes. So many other materials like polyester, it's cheaper, it runs really nice and clean, right? But if you've ever smelled a pair of polyester socks after a single day, it is like it'll
knock your socks off.
Yeah, it is horrible. And it's a property of wool. The way it wicks is different. So, I mean, everybody has their recipes, right? And so that's the biggest difference. And we're function first. And to be honest, you asked, when did we make that decision? I don't even think we talked about it. We knew our brand identity, we're all about function first. It has to look good at the end, but if it doesn't work well, we don't want to make it. So
it's true. That is part of it, as I come to know. All right, this has been great. Okay, where I want to go next is a little bit more on some of the things that go into our sock that people may not fully recognize.
Yeah.
So I think there's two routes, and I want to see where you want to go. So I think part of it goes down to our padding, or our terry, which is the technical term, as I've learned, or the elasticity, and a little bit more of the like overall where the roll is at with that.
Truthfully, you should talk about both. And yeah, terry padding.
Where do you want to start first?
We'll start with terry.
Okay, let's go there.
So first of all, you can have any major sock company's probably got 25 different terry patterns that they employ, in various places. And terry, to give you an idea of the function of terry, it's not just cozy and feels good and adds warmth. It's also reduces friction between you and whatever shoe we wear, right? So it's got a lot of benefits to it. But the biggest thing that separates us from, especially some of the lower manufacturers, but certainly not like other ones, they do the same thing, is whether or not you use terry in a contour application. The thing about the human anatomy is that none of us are square, and weirdly, the base programs on these sock knitting machines, they knit everything in squares, which is really weird. Like the toe is just like this perfect straight line where the terry ends. If you just, take the easy route, and the foot bottom, it's just this perfect flat line, and then the heel is like this perfectly cupped thing, and then it's gone.
Yeah.
You ever notice that? Like, you get on Amazon.
I did notice this, but you know what? When we had our discussion for a video that I released recently on padding, you talked about this. So I went home and I looked at some of my socks, and I'm like, oh, there you go. Look at that.
Yeah.
So I want to say, like, if you're listening and you're at home, take a second, go look in your sock drawer, flip your sock in and out, and look at what's happening. You'll see if you have one of our socks and you compare it to one of your other socks, because you're working your way through switching over Gripsticks, look at those patterns, and you can find, especially if you're rocking any of our socks, you'll see that contour pattern that we're talking about.
Yep. I mean, obviously, toe and heel is kind of there's socks that don't have any terry, and actually a lot of women who are just like ultra thin,
right.
You really don't have room if they're buying their shoes that tightly
right.
fit. But, if you're talking about terry, like toe and heel, but even our toe and heel padding, our toe wraps around the entire toe box. We don't shortchange that at all. And the heel is sculpted to go up higher. All shoes, I don't care, even tennis shoes, come around the heel at the top. And as someone who's, again, worked on the trails for a long time, it's probably like the second most common area for a blister is right above the heel.
Yeah.
Right. That's because most budget socks, the terry ends right where you need it to be. And so we carry our terry up. But the bottom line is the difference between the terry that we put in versus the terry that the machines just kind of do if you go with the base program is a lot. Like the amount of intelligence that it took to get there for us, we this is not a joke. I have a photo somewhere, and I'll try to find it if someone wants
And
to
if you
see
do,
it. Maybe it's a video.
If you find it, I'll throw it in the pod.
All right, sounds good. But we were jumping, and at one point, I think BJ may have done a backflip off of a.
We didn't hear. Oh, I'll bleep out what the item
into the pile of reject socks that we in the process of developing. We'd made so many socks mistakes that we could backflip into it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a lot of socks.
It's a lot of socks.
And so yeah, whereas if we just would have started immediately with what the machines were programmed to do, we could have started much earlier. But in the midfoot, it contours up where you need it to against for the arch padding and everything. And it's just, we looked at it from a different perspective. We want this to be comfortable, functional. We'll take the pain on the front end to make sure we get it right to start with.
Okay, so I've had this thing rolling in my head. Were you guys going for the best everyday sock, like the best all around sock?
There are some of us here that answer is probably yes. In my opinion, there's a foundational element, right? If you get all your other foundational principles in terms of the design of the sock and whatever, I think the reason I'm reticent to answer that is only because I think it kind of takes care of itself.
Yeah, it does.
Like if you just come up with a killer product, then it becomes everybody's everyday sock. So,
Anyways, no, I'm not saying, what I'm saying is like, I'm now one of the people that like scour their sock drawer to get my Gripstick socks, because I do notice the padding difference on a personal, like, I'm like, oh, I didn't realize I wanted that.
Yeah.
Until
Well, there's a lot of people that fit that category.
Exactly.
I mean, the vast majority of the world wears cotton or poly socks.
Right.
And I'm not going to get into the weeds there. We can do that we're going to do a whole,
We're going to get like real technical, and we're going to do some really great.
If this isn't technical enough for you.
Yeah.
We're developing a series we're going to call Wool School.
Yep.
Which it's going to be nerding it up with Kevin.
Yeah. And we're going to have some really great, we'll have additional diagrams and other stuff that goes into it. So be sure to subscribe if you're not already subscribed on YouTube. Yeah. All right, Kevin. So we've talked about the TOAY. We've talked a little bit about that. Talk to me a little bit more about why some of the additional elasticity when it comes to sock. Because my personal preference is actually, I do tend to enjoy the socks that hug more.
Yeah. And where you want it.
I didn't realize how much I didn't have it until a Gripsticks. Honestly, I always felt like when I had socks that had in there, I liked them on the in where my arch was, and when I put them on, I'm like, oh, this feels good. And so I ended up choosing one sock brand because I enjoyed it, and then I went from there. But it wasn't until I'd worn the first sock that I took home from work and put it on, realized how much on the third wear the difference was, because I'd gone from that sock to another sock and went back to the Gripstick sock, and I was like, oh, like this thing still holds its form, and I'm like, it's hugging exactly the way I want it to be.
Yeah.
Which is mind-blowing.
Yeah, your question earlier about percentages, right?
Yeah.
So now we are going further down where a less educated wool sock buyer would be like, oh, that's only 37% wool. And then they're going to compare it to something else that says it's 70% wool.
Yeah. There
are reasons that's not good. Like 70% means you don't have enough elastic. You don't have that hug that you need. So it might work for, an hour or two, and then it's going to be baggy and useless and a blister prone sock, right?
Because it's rubbing.
Exactly. So you actually want and like a big long boot sock with a lot of wool is going to have a higher, because it's just a percentage game. A little ankle is going to have less.
Right.
Anyway, so when it comes to elastic, this is born of, for me specifically, because I've not only was I an outdoor guide for a while, I worked in Utah.
Whoa. Let's set the record straight, Kevin. If you've ever watched the show Psych,
I haven't.
Sean is always commenting on how he was X thing during one summer. And I feel like you're the exact same thing. Every single day, I find that you have. So when I was working as a construction worker, when I was working as a chef in this restaurant,
all right, I'll give you the quick. So I worked in the outdoor industry specifically for, I don't know, a total of 15 or 20 years.
It's a good chunk of time.
And when I was younger, I worked in Utah, obviously ski industry, right? When I was younger, they wouldn't give jobs
For the summer.
For the summer.
That's right.
So you're right. So I would go find odd jobs, including construction, including backpacking and climbing.
There's nothing wrong with that. Look, I had 7 jobs in 1 year at one point because I had internships and I was doing all sorts of crazy stuff.
I think there's an In Living Color skit about this right here. Anyway, so yeah, my personal preference on elastic is born of literally hours of repairing people's feet on the trail with anything from duct tape, which works surprisingly well, or moleskin or whatever, from socks that are terrible. It's also
that were too loose.
Yeah, for a variety of reasons.
Right.
Not enough padding in the right places. It's way too baggy. And the other thing about backpacking is we did like 50 milers, so you're out for a week at a time. Nobody wants to carry 5 pairs of socks.
Right. So you're wearing multiple socks.
Yeah. And if they get baggy, if they get baggy after 10 miles a day, then you're putting a baggy sock back on because it didn't rebound in the evening, when you weren't wearing it. And it just gets successively worse over time. And, that it's situations like that where I'm like, okay, I know. And then from the ski industry, I ran a chain of retail ski shops. I was the CEO for quite a while, 10, 12 years. And anyway, I sold an unholy amount of socks during that period and fit a lot of people. And I also, people would come back from a day of skiing and my feet these boots are terrible. It wasn't the boots at all. It was their socks, when they're spending $130 a day to ski, they don't want to pony up another $20 or $25 for a good pair of socks. But a good pair of socks makes or breaks a day of skiing. So I learned a ton about socks. Elastic is crucial in a few areas. Arch support has to have it. Your foot kind of goes through this, remember the square thing I was telling you about? If you just treat it like a square, then you're going to end up with one spot that's perfect, one spot that's too narrow, and one spot that's too tight.
Right.
Our feet are wider in the toe, narrower in the heel. That's called graduated elastic. Like if you're good enough, which we are, but it took a while, you don't just treat everything like this zone that does not move or change. Ours tapers.
And it's not... and it's really hard to make sure to keep consistency.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. Well, yep. I think we will talk about that. I don't know if that we'll fully get to that in this episode. We'll have another episode on that. But like as I've started to see and observe, I make sure so I understand. Okay, what are some of the things I need to highlight when it comes to like hero shots for video? That's one of the things I've noticed is the fact how much we have to check, and we're checking and rechecking our socks
constantly. Yeah,
right.
I mean, every machine's got a little bit of a mind of its own. So the recipe, even from machine to machine, can't just be uniformly applied. You got to make little tweaks. Yeah. And then there's tools we use to check it. But within the arch, that's number one. Right after that, our proprietary quote unquote name for it is called heel trap elastic. Heel trap means that there's like a positive lock over the heel cap.
Okay, yeah.
When you pull the sock on, it should feel like you pulled on a pair of shoes. This kind of, hey, it's on, right? It shouldn't be like, I can't tell.
Yeah.
Like back in the day, I'm 46, I grew up wearing tube socks. Tube socks are exactly what I was talking about with being square. There's no anatomical definition whatsoever. Yeah. The machines are so advanced today that we can body map the sock to fit, the certain thicknesses of the foot goes through as it travels up. So the heel trap is very kind of aggressively down by the heel. It allows for that to snug right around the heel, right where the Achilles, and keep that next to the skin as much as possible because that bunching in that area is the number one cause of blisters. So you need it to be nice and flat and uniform, and that's where the elastic comes into play. And then if it's a taller sock, calf elastic is another big part. And our calf elastic, probably different than most people that you'll see. It always makes me chuckle. And I don't have you'd have to ask the people who make these socks. But if you ever just look at socks on the shelf, right, you'll go to Cabela's or REI or something, and the tightest, most constricted spot on a crew sock is the top of the sock, where the calf is the biggest. Yeah. And maybe the logic is it needs to hold itself up.
Right.
That's, in my opinion, the wrong way to go about that. Because the calf leading up to that spot is fairly baggy, and then you're putting this constriction right around the calf, which that's going to work its way down. And that's when you get the
lines.
Well, not only the lines, but you end up looking like you're wearing the leg warmers they used to wear in the 80s, you know? Like
the ones that hang at the bottom.
Like really poochy big thing. By what we do a graduated elastic that's constantly like kind of a funnel. It's getting larger as it goes up. That means it's hugging the leg all the way up. And because it's hugging, it doesn't let it slide down because it's actually mapped to your calf. So we get a lot of compliments about that all the time, that we don't leave massive lines, but yet the sock still stays up.
That's awesome.
That's a product of graduated elastic.
Super cool. All right. Really great stuff here. Where do I want to go? You know what I want to go? I want to talk to a little bit personally on like, what was it like in the designing process? How much of it was for you like not only a labor of love, because I'm sure it was. You're a person that when you've committed to do something, you're always going 110%. So for you, talk to me some of the moments of, you know, like joy and frustrations. Maybe in the sense of like thinking you got it and then having to go back and be like, dang it. Things like that. I don't know. I think those are the moments that I think I want to talk about a little bit as we wrap up for this episode.
Yeah. Failure is just a data point.
Yeah.
You know, like I have two boys. I'm always telling my kids, you know, how many times did it take for Edison? It was Edison, right? To develop the light bulb, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. I just forgot that. But yeah, it's Edison. And they're like, I don't know. I'm like, you know, a lot. What his famous quote was, I didn't fail. I just learned, you know, X amount of times how not to build a light bulb. It's just a data point. There were times, I don't know that I was ever just like, dang it, you know.
Right.
We weren't under the gun so much to get one out at a certain time frame. I think people really make sacrifices when they put an artificial deadline on something.
Right.
We were just in true R&D mode, it's actually quite liberating. My personality is kind of perfect for that because I'll give you an example. We sent an employee, and he did a great job. Cassidy Kai is good dude. We sent him to a university where they teach this textile knitting. But one of the downsides, well, to this university and to all universities, in my personal opinion, is that they taught something that was very rigid. You know, like back to the square. The machines actually do run faster and better when you design everything like a square, because big shocker, that's the way the machines are designed.
Right.
So he came back, and you know, he was new to it too. So, you know, we didn't know what was gospel and what was movable. And he's like,
this is what they said.
Yeah. These are the 10 rules of sock making that you can't break. And my mind immediately is like, well, let's get to breaking them. You know, that's my personality. Because even as a kid, which got me into trouble a lot, of course, as you can imagine, I wanted to know where the boundaries actually were, so that we knew, not because I like to break things,
but to know where you can go.
Right, exactly. Like you need to know what the thresholds are. Or is it just that way because someone said that's the way you're supposed to do it?
Or because people are like, look, this is, you know, you're looking at it at one perspective of like efficiency, you know, or, you know, but when you're trying to tell a story, or, you know, trying to create a product, tell a story, or do whatever, there's always that perspective at venue. And if you're looking at one perspective, you never look at like, well, why are those there? Because you have a different perspective, and the boundaries, those outliers, will help you be in the spot where you want to be. Then it's like you got to know those, which I think is great. I back you up on that.
Like the 1812 Overture, you know.
Yeah.
I'm drawing a blank as to who did that. I've seen it maybe 5 times, but I'm sure the guy Tchaikovsky.
Yeah, I think so.
I'm sure there's a commenter that's going to tell me I'm wrong.
Don't worry,
and that's okay.
I'm
all right being wrong. What I was going to say though is, you know, there's cannons in this thing. If you've ever seen it live outside,
I did.
It's mind blowing.
So actually, so I did see it live in Boston. I went to Boston last. I took my girls, 2 girls and my wife. We went to Boston to go see for the 4th of July. And normally they do that for the end of their Pops and Pops concert. Yeah. And then they launch cannons, like legit cannons when they do it. But it was rainy and foggy this 4th of July, dude. I was so mad, and so they're like, we couldn't do the cannons this year because it was foggy. And then they finished and no fireworks went off, and everyone was like standing around like wondering what
Waiting
was happening.
for
And they started firing, but they were all like in the middle of the chartle. Like they moved it off so that it wasn't super because of the way the fog had rolled in. Look, when I tell you I was upset, but then I hear a Bostonian. He's like, "How they do this to us? We've been coming here for 50 years." You know, like, anyways. And so
But that never would have happened unless someone's sitting there and they're writing this amazing piece of music and they're like, what instrument could I use here? And there's not one on the approved list.
Yeah.
So I was like, that's it. I'm using a canon.
that's right. He's like, whatever.
That's what we had to find.
Yeah.
Like, where are the canons that we don't know about, right? So we dug into that. I don't know that there was actually 10. There might have been 12 or 15. I'm not sure. What I do know is after testing every single one of them, there was maybe 2 that were real. The rest of them were just like maybe best practices, but they had no real reason for being a rule at all, and other than to make square socks. So that was actually quite liberating, and it was educational for us and Cassidy too. That's when we really started to open the door. The machine that we did break, actually, kind of an interesting story.
Yeah,
We killed it. I mean, like these are
like destroyed it.
Oh, I mean, not just. These are like $40,000 sock knitting machines, and it was in pieces. You know,
Was it just because you got like for making the sock, or because you guys were trying to like
we were
testing it?
Yeah, we were like, you know, we were pushing it. You know, like 88 miles an hour. You know, Back to the Future. We weren't sure what was going to happen. You know. So anyway, yeah, it kind of exploded, sort of. And then the funny thing is, you know, we're engineers here. We have a lot of really talented people who work here, and
We do.
so we called. There's only like 1 or 2 people in the whole country that service these machines, and they're booked out a ways. And we didn't want the machine to be down, so we called them up and said, "Hey, can we get you in here?" And he's like, "Yeah, I'm booked out for 3 weeks, you know, something like that. I can be there at this time." And BJ's like, "Yeah, we're not waiting, you know." So he was really pretty passionate. He's like, "Please don't get into it. You'll screw things up," you know. And BJ took that as a challenge. I think we had it up and running and making socks in like 48 hours.
Nice.
Yeah, and when he came back. He did show up 3 weeks later, and we heard him on the phone talking to his boss or someone else. I don't know, but he's like, "These guys are crazy." You know? Like they're doing things with machines that I've not seen mills that have been around for 40 years doing. You know, we were interested in finding where the limit was, and we found it. You know, and we're obviously backed off a little ways from there, but yeah, it really allowed us to get innovative. And you really unlock the potential of the machines.
Kevin, what are some final thoughts you have for listeners that you would like them to know about the sock that we haven't touched on?
About our socks?
Yeah.
Well, I'll say this much. Wool sourced in the United States, people always ask us what makes our sock different. And the truth of it is, most really good socks in this country are made by the same machine type. The brand is called Lanati. They're Italian. They're phenomenal. Yeah.
They're pretty awesome.
They're like Ferraris, right?
They're mesmerizing. I mean, yeah. I've tried it.
I don't want to think of the amount of effort it took to, and they have like no joke. We were looking at it on their website the other day. They have like 100 models too. I don't even know how.
100?
Yeah, it's a psychotic number of models.
Why would they need that many?
Some poor guy is in an office just like cataloging parts for the rest of his life because each machine is like thousands of parts, you know. And anyway, what really separates the Gripstick sock from everybody else is where our wool comes from. It is a very rare.
The Rambula. So,
Well, not just Rambula, because a lot of people are using Rambula. They're calling it merino because they don't think you're smart enough to pronounce Rambula, which could be true. I don't know.
You shouldn't. If you listen to this podcast, you now know how.
But our wool comes from the U.S.
From the U.S.
That's a rare thing. To give you an example, like I think in 1950 there were 50 million wool sheep in this country.
50 million. Okay.
50 million.
And this is when?
1950.
950. What do we got
easy
now?
to remember. 1950.
50 million.
What do you think we have now?
Less than 100. Sorry, less than 10.
Less than 100 sheep?
Yeah.
These socks would be worth a lot.
Listen, my math brain isn't working right now, apparently. No.
Less than 100 million.
Less than 10 million.
It is less than 10.
Is
5.
it? Oh, I was going to say 6.
We have 5.
5, strictly 5 million.
We've lost 45 million.
And how many of them are in here in Utah?
Utah is in the top 5 or 4 or even 3, depending on which report you read.
Yeah.
of the wool producing states in the country. We our climate is good. We have sheep need winter and summer grazing. Utah has a lot of elevation change, you know, so we have lots of winter grazing down low and summer grazing up high. So it's a great place for sheep here, and
all sheep are welcome.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yep.
Can we put that on a shirt?
But it's even the ones that are making them here. There's one other company that we're aware of that does a really good job that makes out of local wool, and I think for military products, I think they're required to use American wool. But most domestic products, they might be made in the U.S., but they're not using American wool. So it's really, you're supporting local ranchers, local sheep farmers.
Look, we said this at the beginning, right? At the end of the day, this is a story. Yeah. And the socks, from our belts to our wallets to our socks, we want that to be focused on the fact that we do things here in America by people who that might be your neighbor, who has a ranch, you know, that it goes and takes care of the, you know, on the weekends, or is in a factory like ours, working on machines, trying to get the right percentage of knits for the padding. That's what, you know, that's what it is, and I think that's awesome.
It's really rewarding for me to be, because it's very few products that I've been affiliated with do I get to meet and talk to the entire supply chain.
That's a really great point. I think we should really get somebody from one of our sheep farms.
Yeah.
To come on the pod.
Cool. Yeah.
Anyways, well, Kevin, thank you so much for coming on. You will be on, I'm sure, at some other point. I will be on at some other point. If you liked this episode, be sure to leave a review. It does help us get discovered, and share it with those who are your friends, or you want somebody to also nerd out with us that we talked about socks. In the Works is where we celebrate ingenuity, resilience, and craftsmanship through interviews with people behind Gripsticks like Kevin, entrepreneurs, and other American-based businesses. On this show, you'll learn about the important successes and challenges of American manufacturing, while also getting a peek behind the curtain at Gripsticks. If you'd like to join in on the conversation, be sure to leave a comment or send us a voice message on Spotify podcasts, and to remember to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. We'll see you guys in the next one.